So you may remember Sidney Powell. She's been on this show before. It's a woman, Sidney Powell. She's the author of this book called License to Lie: Exposing Corruption in the Department of Justice. She's been on the show numerous times. She happens to be a Dallas attorney. She's also a former U.S. attorney. At the time, she was the youngest assistant U.S. attorney ever appointed. She's worked in the Justice Department as a prosecutor. She now has a private practice where she does federal appeals. So she has a federal appellate practice. She's argued over 500 cases, which is a huge number for any lawyer, over 500 cases in the federal appellate system. And she is the one, her book, License to Lie, was and is about is from 2014. It's about what happened inside the FBI in the prosecution in the Enron and other cases. But the Enron was a key case, the prosecution of Enron, key case in which her book really was it was an eye-opening, whistle-blowing book describing the corruption inside the FBI. She told stories, names, places, dates, who did it, what sequence occurred. She told the story of literally, and one of the main characters in the story, this is not a fiction, a true story. She told a story particularly of Andrew Weissman. He is a U.S. prosecutor. He worked with her in the Enron case. Andrew Weissman, as she describes him, was the kind of attorney who would literally make up charges, converge two laws into one. He would make something that was legal into something not legal and then prosecute and put innocent people in prison. He had in one particular case, the way he concocted this allegation of violating a law by merging two different laws was reversed. He was found at fault by the Supreme Court, reversed 9-0. He is vengeful, nasty, vindictive, mean-spirited, and as Sidney Powell often describes, prosecutors, their goal is not to find a way to convict the defendant. Their goal is to find the truth. And if the truth in your discovery, in your preparation, causes you to see that the accused was wrongly accused or overcharged or charged with something that didn't quite fit, your job is to pursue truth. It is not to pursue convictions. It's a core tenet of a civilized criminal justice system, a core tenet of America's criminal justice system. Andrew Weissman, key player described over and over in License to Lie. He's also, if you're recognizing that name, he's also the one who has been heavily involved in the Mueller investigation of the complete frame-up of President Trump, of the Trump-Russia collusion frame-up cooked up inside the FBI. The conduct of Andrew Weissman and others on the Mueller team was egregious beyond description, working very hard to make innocent people, force them through, and you might be thinking, well, if they're innocent, then nothing can happen to them. They'll be fine. Not true. You have not ever experienced, if you've not ever experienced, which I have not, don't ever hope to, but have not experienced the power that the federal government has, especially the FBI, to investigate everything in your life, every check you've written, every tweet you've sent, every text message you've sent, and find something. If you haven't experienced that, I'm happy for you. But unfortunately, for many people involved being charged by the FBI, and particularly by working with this Andrew Weissman, this is he's a dangerous federal prosecutor. So why we're talking about him today is this. So last night here in Dallas, we had a tremendous event. I was asked to do one of those events where you have somebody on stage who's famous and you interview them. So I was asked to interview Sidney Powell at an event last night here in Dallas. So I did that. We did a whole hour. We ran through it was all on this Spygate thing, but ran through kind of what happened, all the wrongdoing inside the Obama administration in pinging the NSA database before the whole Muellergate even came to public attention. So we went through basically what happened even before the Trump-Russia collusion thing came up, the Obama administration abusing the NSA database. Then we talked about the charges, how we came to have the Trump-Russia collusion hoax start, the dossier thing, and we also talked about the FBI setting up George Papadopoulos Papadopoulos. And then we talked about, how do you find accountability in this? How do how do we set the record straight? So it was a really substantive, great thing. One case we didn't talk much about, though, was Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who, as you may recall, early on in the in this whole appointment of Mueller, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn was completely entrapped by the Mueller team, ended up, and I'll go through all the stories of his case again because I want to get to my more important case, what's happening today on that subject. But Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, just a stellar guy. He's been on my show, this show. He's been on other shows where I've substitute hosted. He's a stellar guy, a true servant, a leader, an American who served in our military for years honorably, just completely mistreated by Weissman and others in the FBI, end up pleading guilty, bankrupted, had to sell his house. And so he's one who's still part of, he had to break away from the Trump team and a Trump defense kind of organized effort and working himself. But the great news that I was out today is that Sidney Powell has now taken over the representation of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. This is great news. This is great news for Flynn, for Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Great news for Sidney Powell, who's been on top of this. She's on all the big news shows all the time trying to explain to people the inner workings of the FBI and the Department of Justice and what was so wrong about the whole FISA warrant application process and what was so wrong about how the dossier could have been sufficient to get a FISA warrant. She has been relentless in pointing out how egregious the conduct has been by the FBI and Department of Justice in this entire Mueller mess. So she's now representing Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Part of what she talked about last night was really the topic of our last segment today. I'm just thrilled, by the way, that for Michael Flynn, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, I think he's just, and I got to tell you, for maybe Andrew Weissman is a little tiny bit nervous today. Let us hope, because his conduct was so out of line. In fact, one thing she was saying on stage last night, Sidney Powell was saying, was that, all of us all along kept calling this the Mueller investigation and the Mueller statement when he came out and gave a statement last week and the Mueller report. And one of her central points last night was that it was really Weissman, Andrew Weissman, pretty much running the whole thing. Andrew Weissman was she said, I see his fingerprints all over this, over the report that Mueller submitted as his report, over the way the report went out of its way to dangle temptation in front of Congress to find some basis for perhaps an obstruction charge against the president to allow them to move forward with impeachment. She says Mueller, he was sitting in the back of the room, in the corner, twiddling his thumbs during this investigation. Weissman ran it, and Weissman is really a bad actor. So back to what is happening in Washington today. So this is a great thing. I think Andrew Weissman hopefully is getting very worried. And I think Sidney Powell's presence in a formal way in this case is a great thing for America. But I want to introduce one thing she talked about last night, and we're going to be talking about this more going forward. There's a concept called lawfare. Like Lawfare, lawfare. It is the use of laws and the legal system to push your agenda. And in particular, what is so egregious and outrageous that is happening as an example of lawfare is inside the United States Congress, the Democrat-run Congress. And that is the idea that just today, I think, in fact, I think it was just today, that the Congress voted to give more power, more subpoena power to the chairs of various committees. The overarching characterization Sidney Powell gave to this is that the ways in which the U.S. House changed their rules about how they function, it's like they created the U.S. House as a mini Department of Justice. That they went past their role of, obviously the main role of Congress is to represent the people, to consider and pass laws. They also have an oversight function. They have oversight over the other branches. All the branches kind of have, they're supposed to be three co-equal branches. They all kind of have oversight. But her point was that the House, under Speaker Nancy Pelosi, extended so much power to committee chairs that they kind of set up their own little fiefdom, their own little, mini Department of Justice designed to give more power to the committee chairs to go after all the people they want to destroy, all the people they want to investigate. So they're talking about, for example, they don't have, they can issue subpoenas. The question was, well, once they issue a subpoena, and this website that's very favorable to this lawfare concept characterize it as that the House is streamlining subpoena enforcement. But so they're saying if they subpoena, some character, let's say it's the president's former attorney, McGahn, they subpoena him, he doesn't produce documents, whatever they ask him to do, or show up, the House, gave themselves through their own votes, and it was a straight party line. All the Democrats voted in favor of these changes today, or yesterday or today, and all Republicans voted against it. The point is, they're trying to give these House committee chairmen more power to punish people who don't comply with their subpoenas, including the power to fine. So the mission of this entire effort, and we'll talk about this more. I'm going to have to go into this again tomorrow and give you more detail about it. But the gist of it is, it's designed to give more power to the Democrat committee chairs to continue to harass, intimidate, and threaten everyone connected with Donald Trump. Everyone connected with anything they want to investigate. They want to be able to use these powers to simply, it doesn't matter what Trump says, if they've got somebody in their crosshairs, they've got someone they think could get them to turn, to be able to use their subpoena power, now streamlined, use the punishments they've now given themselves the power to pronounce. They think they can essentially corner Trump with all that they're going to do by getting everyone around him under their thumb. This is what Pelosi is doing. Is a continuation of the Mueller witch hunt. It's the continuation of the kind of tactics Mueller used. This idea of cornering somebody and trapping them, scaring them, frightening. I mean, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn lost his house. He's lost everything. And so what the left is doing, there may be a challenge there. I'm not sure who can bring it, maybe Solicitor General, but there needs to be a challenge about whether this usurpation of power by the House is justified by the Constitution, and the Constitution's saying that the House and the Congress has oversight over the executive branch and judicial branch, say, oh, they're all co-equal, or did the Congress overstep their bounds? Did they step past the bounds of oversight and essentially acquire or ordain for themselves something more like judicial power or more like executive power? Because they aren't the executive branch and they aren't the judicial branch. They are the legislative branch. Oversight may have some limits on it, and I think there may be a challenge to what they're about to do. What you're going to see between now and the 2020 elections, and frankly even past then, is the effort, it is the death by 1,000 hacks expression, the effort to go after President Trump in every conceivable way, using these new powers, going after people who have some information that perhaps they can get from them via subpoena. They don't respond to subpoena, or they don't answer to the liking of that particular committee chair, and then you're going to see the argument that those people are going to be held in contempt, they're going to be fined. This is a very dangerous phase that Nancy Pelosi has started in the U.S. House, and how far they'll go with it and whether the courts will permit them to go with it is a really, really important question. So I'll wrap up today by saying that there's so much happening in Washington. I want to be sure, and I always try to say in every show, I do this show out of simple love of this country, out of grave concern for where we're headed in this country, grave concern over what the American left is about, what they want to do, what their missions are, how much the mission of the American left is really at its core the destruction of the founding idea of America. The American left, the idea of destruction of borders, destruction of the rule of law, which we've seen in Mueller and the entire FBI, DOJ conduct in this whole case. We see that the Congress usurping power that belongs to the executive and the judicial branches. What the American left stands for at its core is destruction of free markets, just the crushing of individual liberty, the abandonment of the idea of citizenship, really at its core, what the American left stands for is the destruction of the idea of America as it was founded. And that's really why I do this show, to speak up for the extraordinary greatness of America, to raise alarm bells about how significant the actions of the American left are, how significant, how dangerous, how extreme they are, and to encourage everyone to be part of the fight to preserve this extraordinary, precious experiment in human liberty, America.